Join me on Farrow.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with Inaya Falarin Iman and myself, Mercy Moreki. We're on your TV, radio and online.
We're with you until midday with the latest stories, talking to expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
Yes, and get in touch with those opinions on GB Views at gbnews.uk. We'll get to those throughout the programme, but first, here's your latest headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning, 2 minutes past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. Experts have been expecting economic growth to flatline. The Office for National Statistics says consumer-facing services, retail, hairdressers and hotels struggled, while there was a notable decrease in the manufacturing sector. Some of the fall, they said, was partially offset, though, by stronger than usual summer performance from professional services like lawyers, accountants and architects. The value of the pound has risen again briefly after it fell to below $1.10 overnight. The drop followed the Bank of England warning that its emergency support package in place to try to stabilise the markets will end on Friday. Governor of the bank, Andrew Bailey, told an event in Washington that the funds had 3 days left to get this done, amid the continuing market turmoil following the Chancellor's mini-budget. The bank have made a series of interventions to address what they called the dysfunctional market in the wake of the turmoil over the government's mini-budget. Russia's security service says it's detained 8 people in connection with an explosion that damaged a bridge annexed to Crimea at the weekend. The Kremlin's Federal Security Service say 5 of those held are Russians, while the others were Ukrainian and Armenian. It has NATO defence ministers a meeting in Brussels today to try to discuss providing Ukraine with additional support. Several areas of the country, including the capital, Kyiv, were targeted by Russia yesterday, leaving at least 26 people dead and dozens more injured. Major General Jonathan Shaw told GB News he expects NATO to back up political words with military aid.
I expect them to put some military flesh on the political bones that came out yesterday when Stoltenberg said that the West would stick with Ukraine for as long as it took. So today we'll be looking for some sort of substance to that political statement.
Some renewable energy generators and nuclear power plants could have their revenues capped under a new government plan. Now, the proposal is to take from the profits that energy companies have generated from recent record-high energy prices. The government concluded that as gas prices soared, many wind and solar farms were paid a lot more than normal for their products, even though their costs hadn't hugely increased. Well, Labour's accused the government of a screeching U-turn, saying the government had accepted its calls for a windfall tax. It's day 2 of the case that could allow the Scottish Parliament to legislate for another independence referendum. The case gets underway for the second day today. The Supreme Court have been asked to decide if Scotland's Parliament have the legal authority to go ahead, despite opposition from the UK government. Scotland's First Minister would like to hold a referendum next October. The UK government's expected to launch its set of arguments today. The British Medical Association's warning the NHS is in danger of complete collapse after a poll found that more than 2 in 5 senior medics plan to leave the service in the next year. Doctors at the association say the NHS and its staff are on their knees after real-term pay cuts and staff shortages. The BMA survey found 44% of hospital consultants in England plan to leave or take a break from working in the NHS over the next year. Well, they're calling for immediate action, urging the government to restore doctors' pay. The actress Angela Lansbury has died at the age of 96. In a career that spanned 8 decades on stage and screen, she was well loved for her long-running role as the amateur detective Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote and her leading role in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Her family released a statement saying she died peacefully in her sleep at her Los Angeles home. A picture of a buzzing ball of cactus bees has won the Natural History Museum's annual Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. It's the US photographer Karina Eigner who took the prize with her shot of the insects on a Texas ranch. The Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year was awarded to a Thai teenager for his photograph of a baleen whale. An exhibition of the competition's top images opens up at the Natural History Museum in London this Friday. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's coming up today.
Prime Minister Liz Truss faces her second Prime Minister's questions later today, with signs that the GDP may be shrinking, the pound bouncing around, and internal Tory party divisions. How much of an uphill struggle does Truss face for her future fortunes?
And NATO defence ministers will meet in Brussels today and tomorrow to discuss the ongoing support for package to Ukraine after Russia's significant escalation of the conflict this week. Russia has detained 8 people over the Crimea bridge attack. We're going to speak to a special advisor to the Ukrainian parliament for more on that later.
And the government looks set to officially designate China as a threat to the United Kingdom. Well, why the change in policy? Is this long overdue, and what retaliation might we expect from President Xi?
That's all coming up on our show. We're here till midday as usual, so stay tuned because we have much more as well across the programme. And remember, you can get in touch with your views on our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now, there is a warning this morning that government tax cuts could leave British consumers facing higher prices for the foreseeable future. The bleak statement from the International Monetary Fund comes as the Bank of England confirmed it would not continue its emergency interventions in financial markets beyond this week.
Yes, well, at noon, the Prime Minister will face opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer in the Commons for her second outing at the dispatch box as Prime Minister. Truss will likely need to put on a convincing performance to uplift the mood of her parliamentary party.
Yes, well, joining us now to discuss this and all things politics is Kevin Schofield, political editor of the Huffington Post. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, with GDP shrinking, and we've also had the problems in the market over the last couple of weeks, do you think that Liz Truss will be entering PMQs with much confidence?
I dare say she will. You know, she does have remarkable self-belief, but there's no doubt that she's certainly providing Labour and Keir Starmer with plenty of ammunition to attack her with at lunchtime today. I mean, you're right, already this morning we've been told that the economy is shrinking. The economy more generally is in a parlous state. Last night's announcement by Andrew Bailey that the Bank of England would be withdrawing its support for the pensions industry on Friday spooked the markets again, and the value of the pound plunged. You mentioned there the IMF report from yesterday criticising the government's economic strategy. So she certainly doesn't have her problems to seek. She's got to try and find, or she and Kwasi Kwarteng have got to try and find something in the region of £60 billion of spending cuts in order to pay for the tax cuts that were announced in the mini budget. And she's facing a lot of anger and a backlash from her own MPs. So yeah, everywhere she looks right now, she's in quite a lot of trouble.
And given everything you've just said there, this does look like it's Sir Keir Starmer's to lose. And we do know that Labour is massively ahead in the polls at the moment. Some polls show even 30-point gap between Labour and the Conservatives. In that context, what does he need to do now? Because he can effectively just sit back and watch the chaos unfold if he wants to.
Yeah, I mean, although I've seen plenty of occasions in Prime Minister's questions where you go into it thinking, well, whoever the leader of the opposition is at the time has got a bit of an open goal here, he's bound to win. And it doesn't always work out like that. So you never know. And the thing is as well, expectations for Liz Truss ahead of Prime Minister's questions today are so low that it wouldn't be that difficult for her to actually exceed those expectations. The same happened really in her party conference speech last week. But yeah, getting to your question on Keir Starmer, I think the Labour strategy is clearly to try and pin the blame for everything that has flowed from the mini budget on number 10 and number 11. Now, the government's argument is that these are global factors. Inflation is going up around the world. Interest rates are going up around the world, which is true to a certain extent. However, on the back of the mini budget, certainly things got a whole lot worse in the UK specifically. So I think what Keir Starmer will look to do today is to try and pin all of this economic uncertainty, to put it mildly, at Liz Truss's door. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, she'll have a lot of pre-prepared lines. As we speak right now, she will no doubt be rehearsing them with her team inside number 10. So yeah, we'll just have to see how she manages to beat back against what Keir Starmer has to throw at her later on this afternoon.
And what do you make of perhaps the infighting and the rebels within the Tory party? I mean, it was reported by the BBC today that, for example, some MPs in the Tory party are in discussions potentially with the Labour Party in order to oppose fracking. I mean, what do you think that the Prime Minister Liz Truss could possibly do in order to actually get her own MPs behind her?
It's very difficult, because what you've got to remember is that most Conservative MPs didn't actually want her to be Prime Minister. She only made it onto the ballot to be the final ballot to be Conservative Party leader at the very last attempt. She was well behind Rishi Sunak all the way through the contest. She was behind Penny Mordaunt right up until the last round. So she's already on the back foot as far as her MPs are concerned. Yesterday in Treasury Questions, Kwasi Kwarteng was coming under fire from the likes of Julian Smith, former Chief Whip, Mark Harper, another former Chief Whip, both Rishi Sunak supporters, it has to be said, during the leadership contest. So it's very difficult for her. Now, as I say, she was already on the back foot when she became Conservative Party leader. Obviously, she's had pretty much a nightmare first month in the job, so that hasn't done her any good whatsoever. I think what she's got to do is just to try and calm the markets. Now, whether that involves further U-turns is going to be very difficult for her, I think. I think her credibility is already shot to bits. Or trying to push through spending cuts, which again is going to meet with pretty fierce resistance, not just from Labour, but from many of her own MPs. Things like benefits increasing by average earnings rather than inflation would provoke a huge storm of protests. So it's very difficult right now to see how she can win over her MPs. But, you know, Prime Minister's Questions is a unique occasion. It allows her to try and rally the troops and, you know, face their common enemy, which is obviously the Labour Party. So she'll probably, I would imagine, get through today reasonably unscathed. But the big problems are going to come further down the line.
And I've noticed on Twitter this morning that hashtag general election now is trending, which implies the people of Twitter, anyway, are not very happy with the government they currently have. Do you think this is something that really does worry Liz Truss? Because she said, hasn't she, throughout her campaign, that she's not afraid to do unpopular things as long as they're right for the country and as long as they create growth. But that's quite disingenuous, isn't it? Because we know that politicians and prime ministers are always looking at public opinion very closely.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that was one of her big selling points during the leadership contest, was that she was willing to be unpopular, take tough decisions. Well, that has kind of evaporated really since she got the job. She's obviously U-turned on two or three things, and the most significant being obviously the decision to not go ahead with the abolition of the 45p income tax rate paid by the highest earners. So yeah, all the tough talk about not being unpopular, yeah, that has really, as I say, evaporated. Now, on a general election, I think, to put it mildly, it would be incredibly brave for a Prime Minister to go to the country when they're anything up to 33 points behind the Labour Party. I think a general election would only happen before 2024 if Liz Truss was brought down. I've spoken to quite a lot of Conservative MPs who aren't happy with Liz Truss, far from it. But they say it would be ridiculous to change leader again so soon after they dumped Boris Johnson. And if they did so, really, the public would demand a general election. They wouldn't want another Prime Minister imposed on them without giving the whole country a say. So I still think that a general election is unlikely. But, events may well overtake the situation. The Liz Truss government could potentially collapse, in which case I think then we could be possibly looking at a general election maybe in the early part of next year. But as things stand at the moment, I think it's still more likely to be 2024.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that fascinating insight, Kevin Schofield, political editor of the Huffington Post. I do think it is true to say that Liz Truss does have extraordinary levels of self-belief in the backdrop of the context that she is facing. But, is it terrible that I do feel a bit of sympathy for her? I mean, she's only been Prime Minister for about a month, and she inherited such a challenging situation from the COVID backlog, the economic devastation from COVID, the energy crisis. I mean, is that, can she really be held completely responsible?
And she's only, it's only been a week, really, of actual sort of governing time because of all the events that have happened over the last couple of months. So it is still very early days, but then the alternative argument is, well, look at the destruction she's managed to make in those 7 days. So that's the other side of the argument, which I can also understand. But keep your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We're going to read some very shortly. But first, really important story. This former hospital nurse, Lucy Letby, is currently on trial after being accused of murdering a 5-day-old boy just days after killing another baby on a neonatal unit.
Well, she denies all the charges, and GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has this report from Manchester Crown Court.
You can see now there was a pattern emerging. That's what the prosecution has told the jury at Manchester Crown Court in the Lucy Letby trial. The former nurse is charged with the alleged murders of 7 babies, as well as the attempted murders of a further 10 while she was working on the neonatal ward at the Countess of Chester Hospital. For some of the babies, she's charged with multiple attempts of trying to take their lives. And yet earlier this week, Lucy Letby stood in the dock and pled not guilty to each of the 22 charges against her, one by one. As part of the prosecution's opening statement, we heard about some of the methods Lucy Letby allegedly used in her attacks. Instances of air being injected into the bloodstream, milk and other fluids being injected via the nasogastric tube, even 2 instances of insulin poisoning, always while Lucy Letby was on shift. So far, we've heard the details around child A through to child G in this case. And today we expect the prosecution to continue from child H onward. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
And we will be bringing you any updates on that trial as we get them, of course, here on GB News. But we can now go to some of your views. Carol says, it's no surprise that this country's in a mess. On 7th of July, Boris was forced to resign. Then we had a zombie government. Then Liz Truss was asked by the Queen to form a government, which only functioned for 2 days before the tragic news of the death of the Queen halted proceedings. Parliament resumed work for 4 days following the funeral, basically listing all the things that have happened, which is what myself and I were saying about. She hasn't had that much time to actually get on with governing. So Carol estimates 7 days in the last 96 days is what we've had of an actual government.
I do think that is a fair point. I mean, Gavin is much more absolutist. He says whatever Truss does now, she's on a hiding to nothing, and Labour will be back in number 10 by 2025. I think that is a lot of what commentators and observers are saying, but we also have to remember that, a year ago, nobody would have predicted the situation that we are in now. And I have repeated this before, but I do think that politics, if there is one thing that defines it at the moment, is its kind of instability and unpredictability. So it is possible that something could change if she actually benefits from the thing that she's forwarding, which is short-term pain for long-term gain. If that comes about, then maybe we'll be saying something different.
But it's a question of whether she has long enough to see those long-term gains come to full fruition, because that is what she will be measured against, growth, because that's what she has framed her entire leadership as. That's the focus of her entire leadership, growth. And so it'd be very easy to measure the outcomes, and it will be very easy to see if she fails in that. But keep your views coming in, gbviews at GB News. We're going to take a short break, but coming up, any attack on infrastructure critical to NATO military alliance would trigger a, quote, united and determined response. That's according to NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg. Well, is there a risk of escalation in the war in Ukraine? That's what we'll be asking after this quick break.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Bit of a three-way split with the weather today. Much of eastern England staying dry and bright. A mix of sun and showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain elsewhere in between, thanks to this weather front that's just slowly ambling across the UK, bringing cloud and outbreaks of rain, particularly to parts of Wales and northwest England through the rest of today. But clearing away from Scotland and Northern Ireland, so skies starting to brighten here with some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around. Clouding over the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, but generally here staying dry and bright. We'll see a bit more rain just creeping into parts of the Midlands and southwest England by the end of the afternoon. With a bit of brightness, temperatures getting into the high teens across the southeast corner. Elsewhere, we're looking at generally 14 or 15 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll see a little bit more of that rain over the Midlands, just drifting south across East Anglia and the southeast. Nothing too heavy, but staying fairly misty and murky across southernmost counties of England, with drizzly rain at times. Elsewhere, many places dry. Quite a chilly night, especially for Scotland, the far north of England. Some frost likely in rural spots here, but cracking start to Thursday with plenty of sunshine around. Some fog patches, and particularly in the south, quite grey, misty, murky. And we'll still have some drizzly rain at times across southernmost counties of England. Some rain as well will come into western parts of Scotland, particularly the Highlands, the Western Isles, where it could get quite blustery. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, but actually a good chunk of the country tomorrow, dry and bright, with decent spells of sunshine and temperatures around average for the middle of October. A bit more of that wet and windy weather will push across northern Scotland, and we'll see some rain spreading through the central belt during Thursday evening. At the same time, some patchy rain still across southernmost counties of England, and then more rain coming back into the northwest. It's all a bit messy really, and stays that way into the outlook. Further spells of rain crossing the country with some sunshine in between.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 10:26. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Maroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, now NATO defence ministers will meet in Brussels today and tomorrow to discuss the ongoing support package to Ukraine after Russia's significant escalation of the conflict this week. Russian missiles have hit multiple cities in Ukraine over the past couple of days, killing 19 people and wounding 97.
And Russia has detained 8 people over the Crimea bridge attack, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calling for more sanctions to respond to this new wave of terror. Well, joining us now to talk about the latest developments in the war in Ukraine is Mykola Volensky, an advisor to the Ukrainian Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called for further sanctions. Do you agree?
Of course, it's something what European Union and all countries will provide it, to continue put more sanctions about the aggressor, about the Russia. But also, as we mentioned, we waiting for biggest result during the Brussels NATO Ministerial Summit, or also we are waiting, for more sanctions and more military supply for our allies, because it's something what is important as after the 2 days from now, the Russia, study the most powerful, the missile attacks since 24th of February, in my opinion. After that, we don't need to forget, because in the Russia propaganda TV channels all the time try to mention it, what's happened in Crimea. They call it it's real terroristic act of aggression. But don't forget it is real terroristic aggression, since 24th of February, it's in Ukraine, because they tried, to kill the civilians. They tried, to destroy the science or also building of Kyiv Shevchenko National University, etc., etc., on museum, or even, their critical infrastructure. It's why, I'm thinking why it's today it's so important. Ministerial NATO summit is held in Brussels, and also don't forget it. The Ukrainian delegation also was invited. The Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Foreign Affairs, has already arrived, to join today's important talks about the future military supply and support. From this reason, I'm totally agree. All of countries will continue and need to continue to pull more sanctions against the aggressor.
You've just mentioned there needs to be more action, and Mr. Zelensky himself has called on the West to find new ways to apply political pressure. I just wondered what you think those ways are, because lots of pressure has been applied to Russia so far, financial sanctions, energy sanctions, so to speak. What more can the West do to put that pressure on Russia that Ukraine is calling for?
We understand from the statements of Vladimir Putin all the time, he tried to using, special words as nuclear power, nuclear, weapon against the Ukraine. It will be possible or not. But from this reason, if world didn't, answer it, in this way, we will see that will be their next, step that Russia will, for example, try, to put their tactical nuclear weapon, for example, in Kherson region, or is another one. From any reason, the economic of Russia, all the time try to fall down, even after the missile attacks from 2 days ago. Their minus 20% of the Gazprom actions it pulled down. From this reason, I'm totally agree. But also the sanctions we need to pay attention about the countries we involving with support of Russia. I mean, like, we don't need to forget it. Ibrahim Raisi, the leader of Iran, he continued to deliver it, so special drones, for the Russia. In Russia, using all of these attacks from Crimea, for example, and from the Russia side or from Belarus side, this kind of drones they called kamikaze, against the Ukrainians. And again, Ukrainian citizens, against the Ukrainian army. From this reason, there should be the sanctions not just against Putin or just against the countries who involved in conflict, involved with the war with the Russia side. From this reason, I think so.
Well, Mykola, it's always great to have you on the programme. Really appreciate your perspective. Thank you. Do join us again another time. Mykola Volkivsky there, an advisor to the Ukrainian Parliament.
Well, we're going to go to some of your views as you've been sending them in about some of the subjects that we've been talking about. Of course, the big subject, Liz Truss, and obviously her second Prime Minister's questions today. We had a bit of a discussion earlier. I was asking whether or not we need to give her more of a chance since it's only been a few weeks. And Martin has emailed in saying, all we are saying is give Liz a chance. Everyone can see this, but we're also just judging her way too quickly, and the newspapers and television is way too negative against Liz. So that is a perspective. Well, she has a year and a half, so let's hope that she does turn it around in the next few months.
I don't think she has much choice but to do that if she wants to win the next general election. Ray says, is it the media and Labour who are talking the UK economy down and making things sound a lot worse than they really are? Don't get me wrong, I know about price increases, but the pubs and restaurants where he is in Bristol, or she, are packed to the rafters, and the people in there had no worries about the cost of living. Interesting perspective there, because it is depressing to only hear doom and gloom, and in many ways that's because the things that are news are quite depressing. You know, the economy isn't in great shape, and there's not too much good news to report in terms of what's going on politically and economically. But it is also good to remember that it's not the end of the world. You know, we've experienced worse as a country, and the world has certainly experienced worse economically. So, you know, there's still some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, and Tony, he is saying, if I were Liz Truss, I would call a general election to teach those Tory rebel MPs a very hard lesson. Perhaps when or if they ever got back into power, they would rally around the Prime Minister. I do think that is a very interesting point, because obviously they are, some of them, doing what they can to undermine her leadership. That only makes it more likely that the public will no longer support the Tory party if they're not unified with a particular programme.
Maybe many of them have accepted that they're not going to win the next general election. Perhaps. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see in 2 years' time. But after the break, the government looks to redesignate China as a threat to the United Kingdom. Is this long overdue? And what could the consequences be? Well, that's what we'll be discussing after this break. But first, here's your headlines.
It's 10:33. Good morning. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. The Office for National Statistics says the fall was because of a slowdown in manufacturing and in consumer-facing businesses like retail, hairdressers and hotels who struggled. Some of the fall was partially offset by stronger than usual summer performance from professional services. The value of the pound's risen this morning after it briefly fell below $1.10 overnight. The drop followed the Bank of England warning its emergency support package in place to stabilise the markets will end on Friday. The bank have made a series of interventions to support and address what they called the dysfunction in the market in the wake of the turmoil over the government's mini-budget. Russia's security service says it's detained 8 people in connection with an explosion that damaged a bridge to annexed Crimea at the weekend. The Kremlin's Federal Security Service says 5 of those held are Russians, while the others were Ukrainian and Armenian. NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss providing Ukraine with additional support. The British Medical Association is warning the NHS is in danger of complete collapse after a poll found more than 2 in 5 senior medics plan to leave the service in the next year. They're calling for immediate action, urging the government to restore doctors' pay. Well, the Department for Health said record numbers of hospital doctors were working in the NHS over the past year. The actress Dame Angela Lansbury died at the age of 96. In a career that spanned 8 decades on stage and screen, she was well loved for her long-running role as the amateur detective Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote, and her leading role in Bed Knocks and Broomsticks. Her family released a statement saying she died peacefully in her home in sleep at her Los Angeles house. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 10:37 and this is To The Point with Inaya Falarin Iman and myself, Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now for a story that we've been talking about a number of times over the last few weeks. Clashes between protesters and security forces persist across Iran as protests enter their 26th day.
Yes, widespread protests swept across Iran following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who had been arrested by morality police for allegedly not adhering to Iran's strict Islamic dress code.
Well, the protests pose one of the most significant challenges to Iran's rulers since the 1979 revolution, and there are some reports of strike action spreading to Iran's vital sector. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Roxy Hani, Iranian activist. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, firstly, there have been anti-compulsory hijab protests before in Iran. I mean, what do you think is the significance of the one that we are seeing now and why it's gained seemingly so much traction?
Hi, thanks for having me. Actually, there have been protests against hijab after the revolution, 1979, like 40 years ago. But actually, this time is the biggest one that we are facing now. But we need to know that it's not just about the compulsory hijab or morality police. It's about humans' rights, and that the people are fighting for, just like gender apartheid, forced confessions, and free expression, and no due process, and unfair trials, and they are fighting for humans' rights and the right to choose.
As you say, this is more than just a fight for women to choose whether or not to wear the hijab. This is actually a human rights fight. But I did wonder, what do you think the symbolism of the hijab for the Iranian regime is? Because that's what has triggered all of this.
Yes, actually, the meaning, what does it symbolize for regime is totally different from what we actually, the meaning of the hijab for us as a people of Iran. Actually, the regime symbolizes as an Islamic culture or Islamic identity, but for us, it's like a Berlin Wall that if we tear it down, the regime will be down.
I mean, on that point, because I think that there's been a lot of confusion and discussion amongst the West in relation to debates about the hijab, because we know, for example, in France, there is it is a criminal offence, essentially, to wear the full face veil. And so it has sparked many different debates in the West. So what do you think about the kind of Western response, particularly from feminists, in regards to the Iranian feminists and the struggle that they're fighting for there?
If I'm being honest with you, the support from feminists, they didn't enough, support for us, actually. But we had great supports from all over the world, from politics to celebrities, which we never thought they would care about. But actually, there has been a silence from the feminists, and except just like meaningless cutting hair for their Instagrams and social pages. So I think actually the white Western feminists need to take this moment to reflect on what do they have to learn from this moment and this movement in the feminist history.
Yeah, really important point you make there. And I just wondered, obviously these protests are ongoing. It's the 26th day. What do you think the protesters are hoping to achieve? What will be enough for them before they say, OK, you know, we'd like to carry on with our lives. We've achieved something here.
Yes, as I mentioned before, it's not just for compulsory hijab or morality police. We have been fighting and protesting more than 40 years for like gender apartheid, you know, government corruption and the funding of terrorism. But mainly is theocracy. They are fighting for change the regime and theocracy, actually.
And just finally, I mean, what, if anything, can the West do, people within the West and leaders do to support the protests and support the struggle of these freedom fighters in Iran?
Yes, thanks for asking. It's a very critical moment that we need to be heard as much as possible and spread the news, spread to amplify our voice, you know, for the people who are voiceless. And as you maybe know, the internet is totally cut off in Iran. And we need to be heard. And, you know, we ask the Western countries to, you know, stop legitimizing this regime and stop supporting and dealing with this regime that killing their own people. So just ask public, support us and put pressure on the politicians to stop dealing with this regime.
Well, Roxy, we thank you for all the work you're doing, and of course we wish all the best to all of those protesters who are fighting for not just women's rights but human rights in Iran. And we really appreciate your time this morning, Roxy Emhani, there, who's an Iranian activist.
Yeah, really, really important story. Thank you so much, Roxy. On to another story. The Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey will appear in a New York court today as the trial continues over accusations that he sexually abused the actor Anthony Rapp when he was 14.
Yes, well, Kevin Spacey denies the allegations. And yesterday, during the civil case, Anthony Rapp was cross-examined. Well, Alice Porter, our reporter, joins us in the studio to talk about this. So just fill us in on what's happened so far with this case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the legal team for Kevin Spacey, they've challenged the memory that Anthony Rapp has of the alleged incident. Now, Anthony Rapp said that in 1986, he was at Kevin Spacey's apartment in Manhattan. He was just 14 years old. And he alleges that Kevin Spacey picked him up, grazing his buttocks, moving him onto a bed and sort of partially lying on top of him. And Anthony Rapp said he felt like he was being pinned down. And because of this alleged assault, he is suing Kevin Spacey for $40 million. Now, yesterday we heard in court from Kevin Spacey's legal team who said, now the actor at the time was living in a studio apartment and so said that there wasn't a second bedroom and therefore he couldn't have been placed on a bed. Now, Anthony Rapp said, as far as his recollection goes, it was a separate bed, but he could be wrong. Jennifer Keller also said of the evening of the alleged assault, when there was a group of them at Kevin Spacey's apartment, Kevin Spacey was in fact flirting with the actor John Barryman in the apartment, so his focus was very much on him rather than on Anthony Rapp.
And now having Kevin Spacey's legal team try to suggest that Anthony Rapp has made these allegations because of jealousy over Kevin Spacey's career.
Yes, that's right. Anthony Rapp has had, in his own right, a successful Broadway career, particularly he's also appeared in films. But Kevin Spacey has been one of the biggest actors in Hollywood, and therefore the team on behalf of Kevin Spacey have sort of tried to paint a picture that Anthony Rapp has been jealous of his career and that he's doing this, making these allegations in order to kind of get attention and to improve his own career. Now, the court also heard of the emotional impact of the alleged attack and how that's affected him emotionally, and particularly in regard to seeing Kevin Spacey in such a high-profile way in films, and said that actually when he's seen him in movies, it's felt like a cattle prod has poked him, and he gave quite an emotional testimony in that regard.
And so this is a civil case and it's continuing today, but are there other allegations aside from this against Kevin Spacey?
Yes, that's right. So Anthony Rapp was the first person to come forward with allegations against Kevin Spacey back in 2017 when it was very much the height of the Me Me Too movement. And since then, there have been dozens of men who've come forward with allegations, all of which Kevin Spacey has very much denied. Now, at the Old Bailey in London in July of this year, Kevin Spacey appeared because of allegations, 5 allegations from 3 men regarding sexual assault. Now, they go back 17 years to when Kevin Spacey was the artistic director of the Old Bailey, of the Old Vic Theatre in London, and a criminal trial for those charges will take place in June of next year.
Well, thank you, Alice Porter, for bringing us that fascinating and important report. Thank you.
Now, let's go to some of your views. Lots of you have been getting in touch. Conflict, I would say, in the inbox in terms of Liz Truss and the government. Some people are pro-Liz Truss, but lots against her too. Joanne says, I can't quite comprehend how these Tory party MPs, who I wrongly assumed were reasonably intelligent, ousted Boris and didn't think that would open the door. For Labour, she says it's ordinary Joe Public, like her, that will have to pay the price. That's true, isn't it? They did vote out Boris Johnson, who was incredibly popular, who did win that 80-seat majority back in 2019. It was inevitable, I would say, that Labour would take that opportunity to actually reposition themselves. And you can see that's been reflected in their popularity in the polls at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, obviously, Boris Johnson was an incredibly popular Prime Minister, but we also do have to remember that his support was tumbling, and, a lot of people worried that he was not delivering on the manifesto of 2019. So there was a context to his removal as well. Well, Bernard says Truss told everyone that what she was going to do. The members voted her as leader in a democratic election. So why are all the sabotage from Conservative MPs who didn't vote for her and the city who are playing games just to make money? Well, this is an interesting point. I mean, the thing is, if she has a democratic support, then some people have argued that she should hold a general election, and that would actually legitimise her leadership. As our previous speaker and contributor noted, that actually the majority of Tory MPs did not necessarily support her. So
she did, and she did. Bernard, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. She did pretty much say what she was going to do. She said, "I'm going to cut a load of taxes. I'm going to." This was even before she said, "I'd want a huge package to support people with their energy," and so it wasn't a huge surprise. But I think there have been people who have been surprised by the reaction of the markets, and that's probably what spooked so many people.
Well, in another story, in a significant foreign policy shift, the government is set to designate China as a threat to Britain. A formal announcement is expected in the next few days, and the change would put China in a similar category to hostile states such as Russia.
Yes, well, this comes as the head of GCHQ, Sir Jeremy Fleming, warned about an aggressive China. Let's have a listen to what he said.
In the longer run, control is no substitute for the advantage that comes from empowered citizens, open societies, and standard secure alliances. Nonetheless, that paradox of great strength, combined with fear, is driving China into actions that could represent a huge threat to us all.
Well, how important is this shift, and can we expect any retaliation from Beijing? While joining us now to discuss this is Chung-Ching Kwong, activist and campaigns coordinator for the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Really appreciate your time. So just give us firstly your reaction to essentially a ramping up of hostility between Britain and China.
I think the whole shift of moving China into the threat category will mean a lot for a future foreign policy when it comes to China, because the UK government has been identifying China as a systematic rival or competitor, which is confusing. Like, a lot of the government departments don't actually understand what that means, and they wouldn't take into account the human rights violations or the threat that China poses in general when we think about China as a systematic competitor. So they will continue a lot of different projects, or, for example, there are people or civil servants who still want to extend that golden era approach when it comes to China, but that's not possible anymore. And categorizing China as a threat will set the future foreign policy when it comes to China in a very clear direction that we have to be careful.
Yeah, I mean, is this long overdue? Because I remember even a couple years ago that many people that raised concerns about Chinese involvement in our strategic infrastructure, Huawei, were essentially dismissed and demonized. But do you think they've now been vindicated?
I'd say the decision itself, it's definitely long overdue. It should have happened years before, and things would be much more different. Like taking Huawei as an example, the government's approach on Huawei is still very confusing. They still haven't definitely ruled out the chance of Huawei being involved in the 5G infrastructure or other infrastructure. And so these kind of approach will have to change given the decision is being made now, China is a threat. So when we're handling data transfer, supply chain issues, human rights issues, we should definitely have a stronger approach to deal with all these human rights violation, international law violations.
And Sir Jeremy Fleming, who's the director of GCHQ, will warn that Beijing, or has warned that Beijing is believed to be building a powerful anti-satellite capability that will rival GPS and deny other countries access to space if there is war. What do we know about this supposed technology, and how much of a threat does it really pose to the world?
I myself is not a satellite expert, but from my knowledge, China is is very eager to get the first, get into the GPS or satellite market as soon as possible, because in the space environment, there's only several orbits that you can use, and China is trying to get hold of certain orbits so that no other satellite can go into that area, and then they can slowly develop their own technology and whatever they need to achieve their goals, especially expanding their power. Yeah. And so it's in general a threat to every one of us, because blocking communications means a lot of us, because we rely on the internet, relies on communication to do certain things, very necessary routines in life. Yeah. So I'd say it's a huge threat. And China is also very eager in participating in standard setting, as in what kind of rules will govern these kind of satellites, because it's a new area in law. And are we ready to deal with those things? Are we ready? Are we thinking about how do we stop China from dominating that discourse about rule setting when it comes to satellites and other technologies?
And I mean, do you think China will respond to this? Because generally speaking, China seems quite sensitive to its reputation abroad, and often does respond when it feels that they are being misrepresented.
I think China does care in a way, but doesn't in another. If it really cares about what other people or the international community say, then they would have stopped the camps in Xinjiang or stopped cracking down on Hong Kong civil society. But the truth is they don't actually care. The gesture that they're doing are mostly for internal purposes. Of course, it does a signaling effect to other countries, but most of the time it serves as trying to unify a discourse inside the country. So this is what the officials said when it comes to being attacked on issue A, for example, the Xinjiang human rights violation. So this is what we're going to say. I think it serves more of an internal discourse, organization in a way.
Well, your views are incredibly valuable. Thank you so much for clarifying all of that for us. Please join us again. Chung Chun Kwong, their activist and campaigns coordinator for the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China.
Well, keep all of your views coming and make sure that you email gbviews@gbnews.uk. I mean, China is a really fascinating subject, as I mentioned that it has been a kind of confusing approach that we've had to China for the last 10 years. After the Cold War, there was this sense that we should kind of bring China into the economic fold, and they developed rapidly. But all of a sudden, when they're developing and advancing economically way further than we anticipated and competing with us, we're now very worried about that as well.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise, is it? And it does bring into focus how slow the rest of, or the West has been in sort of developing its own technological capabilities, nowhere near rivaling anything that China produces. And perhaps, people would say this is the kind of substantive policies we were meant to be getting on with when the Conservatives won that huge general election, that huge majority. They were meant to be focusing on issues that, secure our place in the world. But of course, there's been a lot of disruption, hasn't there, over the last few years, really, since 2016.
No, absolutely, and I very much agree. Well, we'll be back just in a moment, just after the break.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Bit of a three-way split with the weather today. Much of eastern England staying dry and bright. A mix of sun and showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain elsewhere in between, thanks to this weather front that's just slowly ambling across the UK, bringing cloud and outbreaks of rain, particularly to parts of Wales and northwest England through the rest of today. But clearing away from Scotland and Northern Ireland, so skies starting to brighten here with some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around. Clouding over the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, but generally here staying dry and bright. We'll see a bit more rain just creeping into parts of the Midlands and southwest England by the end of the afternoon. With a bit of brightness, temperatures getting into the high teens across the southeast corner. Elsewhere, we're looking at generally 14 or 15 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll see a little bit more of that rain over the Midlands, just drifting south across East Anglia and the southeast. Nothing too heavy, but staying fairly misty and murky across southernmost counties of England, with drizzly rain at times. Elsewhere, many places dry. Quite a chilly night, especially for Scotland, the far north of England. Some frost likely in rural spots here, but cracking start to Thursday with plenty of sunshine around. Some fog patches, and particularly in the south, quite grey, misty, murky. And we'll still have some drizzly rain at times across southernmost counties of England. Some rain as well will come into western parts of Scotland, particularly the Highlands, the Western Isles, where it could get quite blustery. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, but actually a good chunk of the country tomorrow, dry and bright, with decent spells of sunshine and temperatures around average for the middle of October. A bit more of that wet and windy weather will push across northern Scotland, and we'll see some rain spreading through the central belt during Thursday evening. At the same time, some patchy rain still across southernmost counties of England, and then more rain coming back into the northwest. It's all a bit messy really, and stays that way into the outlook. Further spells of rain crossing the country with some sunshine in between.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Iman and Mercy Maroki on your TV, radio and online. We're with you until midday with the show jam-packed with all of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
Yes, and you can get your opinions into us on our email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to many more throughout the next hour, but first, let's give you the latest headlines.
A very good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. Experts had it been expecting economic growth to flatline, not shrink. The Office for National Statistics says consumer-facing services, so retail, hairdressers and hotels, struggled, while there was a notable decrease in the manufacturing sector. Some of the fall was partially offset by stronger-than-usual summer performance from more professional services like lawyers, accountants and architects. The Bank of England has confirmed that its emergency bond buying scheme, put in place to stabilise the markets, will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank had been forced to intervene amid the continuing fallout over the Chancellor's mini-budget. There's been volatile trading of the pound, which saw it dip to below $1.10 overnight before the bank confirmed its position. Russia's security service says it's detained 8 people in connection with an explosion that damaged a bridge to annexed Crimea at the weekend. The Kremlin's Federal Security Service say 5 of those held are Russians, while the others were Ukrainian and Armenian. Well, meanwhile, Russian shelling is continuing in Ukraine. Well, NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss providing Ukraine with additional support. Major General Jonathan Shaw told GB News he expects NATO to back up political words with military aid.
I expect them to put some military flesh on the political bones that came out yesterday when Stoltenberg said that the West would stick with Ukraine for as long as it took. So today we'll be looking for some sort of substance to that political statement.
Some renewable energy generators and nuclear power plants could have their revenues capped under a new government plan. The proposal is to take from the profits that energy companies have generated from recent record-high energy prices. Well, the government concluded that as gas prices soared, many wind and solar farms were paid a lot more than normal for their products, even though their costs hadn't hugely increased. Well, Labour's accused the government of a screeching U-turn, saying it had accepted its calls for a windfall tax. The Supreme Court is hearing the second day of arguments that will determine if the Scottish Parliament can hold another independence referendum. The court's been asked to decide if Scotland's Parliament has the legal authority to go ahead despite opposition from the UK government. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon intends to hold a vote next October. The UK government is expected to present their argument today. The British Medical Association is warning that the NHS is in danger of complete collapse after a poll found more than 2 in 5 senior medics plan to leave the service in the next year. Doctors at the association say the NHS and its staff are on their knees after real-term pay cuts and staff shortages. The BMA are calling for immediate action, urging the government to restore doctors' pay. Well, the Department for Health said record numbers of hospital doctors were working in the NHS over the past year. The actress Angela Lansbury has died at the age of 96. In a career that spanned 8 decades on stage and screen, she was well loved for her long-running role as the amateur detective Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote and her leading role in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Her family released a statement saying she died peacefully in her sleep at her Los Angeles home. A picture of a buzzing ball of cactus bees has won the National History Museum's annual Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. US photographer Karina Agner took the prize with her shot of the insects on a Texas ranch. Young Wildlife Photographer of the Year was awarded to a teenager for his photo of a baleen whale. Well, an exhibition of the competition's top images opens at the Natural History Museum in London this Friday. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to The Point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Maroki, and Inaya Flaren Iman on your TV, radio and online. Here's what's in our final hour.
Well, more than 35,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK so far this year. This is more than the whole of 2021, when 28,500 people crossed. The government is also facing another legal challenge to its Rwanda plan. We'll discuss this with an immigration lawyer in just a moment.
And good news, Buckingham Palace has now revealed the King's coronation will take place next May, falling on the birthday of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's son, Archie. We'll be speaking later on in the show to a former royal butler to King Charles, who will tell us what we can expect from that event.
And churches in England are having to install new gas and oil boilers as environmental ones are just too expensive to run, putting their net zero plans at risk. The idea back in February 2020 was to meet carbon neutrality by 2030, but that might be unlikely as energy prices soar. So can this target still be achieved?
Yes, very obscure story that, but it just goes to show how ridiculous some of this stuff all is. But we'll discuss all that later on, and we have much more coming up across the programme as well. We are here until midday, and get your views in, gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Now, a very important story to many of our viewers. More than 35,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK so far this year. The Ministry of Defence has said that some 539 people were detected on Monday in 13 boats, taking the provisional total for the year to 35,233.
Yes, well, this is more than the whole of 21, when 28,561 people were recorded crossing the Channel. The latest milestone comes as the government faces yet another legal challenge to its plans to send migrants to Rwanda.
Well, let's speak now to an immigration lawyer, Evan Sampson, who is here with us in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, extraordinary numbers, far more now, even though we haven't reached the end of the year, than the total of last year. I mean, it seems like many of the things that the government are doing just simply aren't working.
No, they're not. And I think the trend is that you'll see it doubling every few years. So since 2018, for example, the numbers have doubled. But we have to put into context over the past, say, 30 years. So, for example, in late 1990, we were accepting over 100,000 asylum applications. So looking back over the trend over a longer period, asylum applications have actually gone down by 50%. So it all depends on conflict, where the conflicts are happening. So in the late 1990s, it was Somalia. So we had an influx of Somali refugees. 80,000 Ukrainians have come into this country. Had it not been for the conflict, they wouldn't be here.
But I think this is a really important distinction to make, because I really don't think the majority of people who want immigration and asylum rules tightened have an issue with people from war-torn countries. The majority, some might, but have an issue with people from war-torn countries coming here to claim asylum. I think where people get a bit frustrated is when they see figures in the media about how many people aren't from war-torn countries, aren't from places where they could have a legitimate claim to be fleeing from war. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm for removing those people who are not genuine asylum seekers. That's absolutely right. I mean, we can't have people coming to this country pretending to be from other nationalities or who are coming here for economic reasons. That's absolutely right. This is the problem. How do we decide who's who? We've got to consider every application on its merits, and this is the problem. The government doesn't have a proper strategy of assessing asylum applications within a reasonable time. For example, it takes 1 year from the initial asylum application being received to them even being interviewed. Now, that surely can't be right. So we need to have a much faster, more efficient system, and also a system to identify who these people are. I mean, many people have no documents. So even if we refuse them, where do we send them to? That's a problem. So we need to have bilateral treaties with countries to send people back once we identify who they are.
Yeah, and just on that point about the processing time being so long, because oftentimes by the time they're processed, then they may have a family and all sorts of things, so they can claim other kind of human rights like right to family life and so on. So our current system clearly isn't working. I mean, what do you say to those who just say that actually, and I think the Home Secretary has floated this idea that nobody who crosses the Channel will be given asylum, making quite absolutist decisions as a strong deterrent for that journey?
I would invite the Home Secretary to read the Refugee Convention, first of all, and let her lawyers give her proper advice, because take the articles. Did you know that you don't need to even have a document proving your identity to come to the UK? In fact, articles within the Refugee Conventions allow you to use a false identity. So you can actually use a fake passport to enter the country.
Even, I mean, you know, the top countries are, you know, Eritrea, Albania. You know, I think a lot of people have a lot of sympathy, and we do take in a significant proportion of people fleeing the country. But what we are seeing seems to be a slap in the face for a lot of people. For a sovereign, democratic country to not be able to control its borders, tens of thousands of people just getting on a dinghy and coming to this country and finding their way in you know, often 3-4-star homes, and when we are in a cost of living crisis, say the least, it's not a great situation whatsoever, is it? I
mean, look, the two options are: we either convince people not to come. That's not going to happen. That will certainly from Albania, where if you go to, if you've been to Albania, there's no young men around. I mean, it's a country full of older people because they've left because of economic reasons. They've no jobs there. So that's not going to happen. What we need is an effective border control. We don't have secure borders. Brexit was supposed to deliver secure borders. It's actually done the opposite. We had the Dublin Convention we could rely upon before to send people back. We can't do that. We need a treaty with France. We need to do a deal. There needs to be some horse trading with France to get a deal so that we can send people back to France to be assessed there.
And what do you say to people who say Suella Braverman, who I believe she's from an Indian heritage and then she went through East Africa, before she came to the country, or her family did, who say, actually, you're just pulling the ladder up behind you? Is that one of the phrases? You've come here, you've benefited from migration, and they're being very critical of her for being a brown woman who's trying to tighten immigration in the country when her family benefited. Now, I personally think that's a ridiculous argument to make, but I can see why people might make it. What do you say to that, as somebody who is a lawyer yourself and from an ethnic minority?
Look, I'm not criticising the Home Secretary for this. It's right that we need to control borders. Look, did you know that we have about 500,000 students coming every year, legally coming here? 10 students, foreign students, bring in £1 million.
We're not talking about those people, though.
For the course,
no, but let's we need to be able to talk about this openly and frankly and clear. People aren't, generally speaking, talking about the students that are contributing economically that came here legally. People are talking about the overwhelming young, able-bodied men who are taking an illegal route to get to the UK with no documents and often not contributing to the system and often jumping the queue and actually oftentimes making life harder. So that is what people are talking about when they are complaining about this issue.
If we have safe legal routes for asylum seekers to come here, so they don't come across the channel, we have safe places they can go and claim asylum. Let's say we get them set up. That will actually double your asylum.
Or would that cause millions and millions more applications?
It will. What will happen is we'll probably get 100,000 a year coming over. So be careful what you wish for. No, let's be clear. It's right that we send back people who are not genuine refugees. There needs to be secure borders. We need to have treaties with other countries to identify people and send them back home. That's the way forward. Government's done that with Albania. And recently, a flight went back to Albania full of Albanians. I don't know if you're aware of that. Because one of my clients was on it. So even at 11 o'clock at night, I applied for an injunction in the High Court over the telephone with a High Court judge. And she refused it. She refused my application. I think she was probably right to refuse it. But we had to act in my client's best interest, and we did that. So the government are actually, to be fair to the government, they are trying to send people back. So it's not just one-way traffic.
Yes, well, really, we could talk to you. We could talk to you all day about this, of course, but we really appreciate your time, and I'm sure you'll be joining us again very soon. Ivan Sampson, there, an immigration lawyer. One of those topics, isn't it?
Yeah,
there's just so much to unpick.
The thing is, we all agree that there should be more dealings with France and a treaty with France and to give them money and all of those kinds of things. They've tried that. Priti Patel gave £50 million to France. It didn't seem to make a difference. She had this policy of Rwanda. nothing seems to be working.
What would you say as well to people who say, how dare you have such, what they might say, anti-immigration views when you yourself, or you're not personally, but your family are immigrants? What do you say to that?
Oh, I'm pro-good immigration. You know, I actually, generally speaking, have quite a liberal attitude towards immigration, but I do think that we need to have a proper process that doesn't effectively create de facto open borders, because we're dealing with thousands of people with no documents and that are jumping the queue.
Yeah, it's not beneficial for anyone, is what I would say. But we have to end it there and keep your views on the issue coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now let's talk about something else. The latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show GDP is estimated to have fallen by 0.3% in August of this year.
Well, the mini-budget from last month, which contained energy bill help, along with a series of tax cuts, prompted turmoil in the financial market. The resulting crisis forced down the value of the pound and raised government borrowing costs, which eventually forced the Bank of England to intervene.
Yes, well, our monthly GDP is now estimated to be close to the level of its pre-coronavirus levels. Well, we can speak to economist Vicky Price more on this. Vicky, thank you for joining us this morning. Can you help us unpick all of this and just give us the most important takeaways, really, for the average person, because it can be very convoluted and confusing?
Well, in terms of the economy, it's slowing down. I mean, that's clear. We have had some upward revisions for the first 2 quarters of the year, which is good news. But in terms of what's happening right now, we're seeing the consumer being quite concerned about spending. We're seeing manufacturing sector, which is constrained still by some supply chain issues, but also input costs have been very high for businesses, and they're very worried about how long the support on electricity prices is going to last. If you remember, for households, the electricity price freeze is meant to last for 2 years, for businesses just 6 months, and it's going to be reviewed in 3 months, so you just don't know how exactly it's all going to work and whether that support will continue. So that's one factor which is affecting things. But what you're seeing also is that there are some funnies in the figures. So if you look at August, for example, you've seen a substantial reduction in what is called sort of health services. It's not that people are not going to the GPs or trying to get into the whole system of the National Health Service, but what has slowed down is testing for COVID, even though, of course, as we know full well, COVID is rising again in terms of incidents that we see, but also the sort of track and test and track, or whatever it's called these days. I've now completely forgotten how it was, because it stopped completely. So it's not happening any longer. So there is very little of that. Track and trace, that's it. I remembered it. It's that type of activity which seems to have stopped. So what you're seeing is that health services are suffering a little bit. So it's a bit of a funny there, but nevertheless, the signs are that the economy is slowing down.
Yeah, you got there in the end. I can never figure out how to say test, track and trace. Is it test, track and trace? Who knows? But obviously the Parliament is now back in action. The government has finally sort of started working properly again. What should we be hearing from, or what would you like to be hearing from the Chancellor to reassure the public and to deal with the sorts of issues and the disappointing figures we are seeing on the markets and for the economy?
Well, what's happening is that the capital markets are not particularly, pleased with what has come out so far in terms of what the government's intentions are on the fiscal side, because, of course, the mini budget that we had on September the 23rd had a series of tax cuts announced, or postponements of increases, or not actually intending to do those increases at all, like, for example, corporation tax that is not going to be going up to the 25% it was going to go up to, but just stays at 19%. All those elements of revenue that were going to be coming into the government and which had already been accounted for, if you like, for any spending plans that had been announced before, those will not be coming in. And therefore, the markets got seriously concerned about whether those measures would mean that public finances were unsustainable, basically, and that the debt to GDP ratio would be rising. And that, of course, would require some remedies, either changing the plans or very substantial public sector spending cuts in this case. We're not going to see any details of any of that until the end of this month. In the meantime, of course, bondholders didn't really want to hold those bonds, so they've been selling them. So long-term yields have been going up. It's meant that mortgage Mortgage rates have been going up, and that's pretty bad for anyone who wants to buy a house or anyone who's redoing their fixed mortgages, which they're going to have to do at some point in the future. So that's a real worry. And the Bank of England has had to intervene. I mean, this is really what's been going on, because both sterling has been falling, and also, of course, those gilt prices have been dropping very significantly because bondholders don't really want to hold them, and has caused huge problems with the pension industry, which is now relying on government help, if you like, to sort of calm the markets down.
Yeah. Well, Vicky Price, thank you for clarifying all of that for us. Thank you for joining us this morning. Vicky Price, an economist there, if you didn't figure that out already.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a subject, I agree, that is often quite mystifying for a lot of people, and she definitely illuminated it there. Please continue to send your views. We have had many views being sent in about the migrant story, and we'll read that out later. But after the break, Buckingham Palace confirmed the King's coronation will be held on the 6th of May next year. What can we expect at the ceremony? We'll be joined by a former royal butler of King Charles III. That's after the weather.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:24 and this is To The Point with Inaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Moroki on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Well, Buckingham Palace has revealed the King's coronation will take place next May at Westminster Abbey, falling on the birthday of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex son Archie.
Yes, well, more than 2,000 people are set to fill the church to watch the coronation of both the King and the Queen Consort.
Oh, so what can we expect from the coronation? Joining us now is Grant Harrold, former royal butler of King Charles III. Thanks so much for joining us on the programme. OK, firstly, what can we expect from the ceremony?
Good morning. I think it's what's been said. It's going to be a slightly different coronation, which doesn't really surprise me because the Queen's coronation in 1953 was a huge event. I think in today's money, it was over 40 million. And I think under the current climate, the way things are just now, they're obviously aware of that. So the coronation will be scaled down. But on saying that, I still believe it will have the same pomp and circumstance. I think what they mean is the actual ceremony will be shorter, but we'll still see the important parts, which is obviously the anointing, the crowning, all the parts that we know that has to kind of take place for a coronation. That will still be part of what we actually witness.
And there's been lots of talk about deliberately putting it on a weekend, perhaps trying to not take up too much working time, time away from the economy because of what's going on with the cost of living. Do you think there's any truth to that as the motivation for putting it on this day?
I'm not sure, because I also read that the coronation in 1953, a lot of the peers wore those very glamorous kind of robes, if I can say that, with the coronets, the coronation robes. And obviously it's been said that this time they'll be asked to wear suits. So going back to that kind of scaling it down, not kind of impacting too much on everyone's kind of working life, that's possibly why they're doing this. But then I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps next year they might suddenly announce that there is a bank holiday to celebrate the coronation. That is equally possible. But I think at the moment it's tricky because there hasn't been a coronation for over 70 years. So there's a lot of planning that goes on. And I think more details in the coming months, especially into next year, will be released as to how this is going to take place.
Is there any significance of the date falling on the King's grandson Archie's birthday, or is that just rumour and conjecture?
I would like to think that it's possibly just coincidence. It'd be lovely to say that's why they picked the day, but then there's other royal anniversaries. I believe it was King George V had his 25th anniversary, Jubilee anniversary on that date. And I think that was it, the Princess Margaret, the late Princess Margaret, had a wedding anniversary on that date. So you could argue that, there's many reasons why they've picked it. I think quite simply, from my time with the royal household and knowing what that diary is like, the schedule is like, it is a case of trying to find a date that is convenient for all parties, including the royal family, to be able to do this. So you'll probably find it's more likely that was the date that was most convenient to have a coronation.
And do you think that we're going to see the kinds of crowds we used to see for the Queen for celebrations like the Jubilee celebrations, for example, and other times when Her Majesty, she's done thousands of events in her life, and she was always revered, and people always really turned up no matter the weather. Do you think Charles will receive the same reception?
I think so. I mean, the coronation again, 1953, 1 million people turned up. Now, I'm willing to bet you, ladies, there'll be more than 1 million people turn up. I mean, as you know, with the late Queen's funeral, it was absolutely packed, as we all know. There was millions that obviously turned up, and I'm sure it'll be the same again. And recently, last week, actually, I saw the King and Queen in Scotland, and again, the crowds just kind of gather. They just come along because it's part of history. This is a coronation. We haven't had one, as I said, in 70 years. People want to be part of it. People want to be there. Whether you like the royal family, you don't like the royal family, I think everybody wants a piece of history, and they know that if they're there on that day, they can say they were at King Charles III and Queen Camilla's coronation.
Finally, will Camilla also be crowned as Queen Consort?
Yes, absolutely. She'll be crowned as Queen Consort, and I believe the Queen Mother, the late Queen Mother, was anointed in the same way. So I think it will be the same process. It is obviously a simpler coronation for the Queen. It's not the same as the King, because obviously he is the King. And just for anybody that's wondering, because there's been a few people kind of wondering why the late Prince Philip wasn't crowned King, quite simply, to be completely frank, it was once seen that kings outranked queens, so therefore a queen would reign in her own right, and then the husband would be a consort. And that's obviously why when it's a king that's crowned, his wife is then automatically a queen consort, but she will be known as Queen Camilla in the time to come.
Well, Grant Harrold, thank you for filling us in on that.
Thank you.
We'll have you back another time. Former royal butler to now King Charles III.
Well, there's been, it will be another, very big moment in British history, coming up next year. And as you kind of alluded to, whether or not that will kind of take some time out of government, perhaps another challenging moment for Liz Truss.
Well, the vast majority of people, it's worth remembering, have never experienced this in the flesh. So it will certainly be significant to the vast majority of people insofar as, you know, a lot of us were not around at the Queen's coronation, of course, the late Queen. So, yeah, it's definitely one for the history books in all respects.
Well, after the break, the Church of England's net zero plans are set to be at risk due to high energy costs and expensive eco-boilers. So what will this mean for churches going forward? Will this lead churches into ever higher prices? We'll be speaking to a priest just after the morning news.
Good morning, it's 11:30. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. The ONS says the fall was because of a slowdown in manufacturing and in consumer-facing businesses like retail, hairdressers and hotels. Some of the fall was partially offset by a stronger-than-usual summer performance from professional services. The Bank of England has confirmed its emergency bond buying scheme, put in place to stabilise the markets after the Chancellor's mini-budget, will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank warned it will be challenging for some households to manage the projected rises in the cost of essentials alongside higher interest rates. Russia's security service says it's detained 8 people in connection with an explosion that damaged a bridge to annexed Crimea at the weekend. The Kremlin's Federal Security Service say 5 of those held are Russians, while the others are Ukrainian and Armenian. NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss providing Ukraine with additional support. The British Medical Association's warning the NHS is in danger of complete collapse after a poll found more than 2 in 5 senior medics plan to leave the service in the next year. They're calling for immediate action, urging the government to restore doctors' pay. The Department for Health said record numbers of hospital doctors were working in the NHS over the past year. Star of the stage and screen, actress Dame Angela Lansbury has died at the age of 96. In a career that spanned 8 decades, she was well loved for her long-running role as the amateur detective Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote, and her role in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Her family released a statement saying she died peacefully in her sleep at her Los Angeles home. We're on your TV, online and your DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1074 and €1.1406. The price of gold is currently at £1,509 and 59 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,907.41 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 11:35. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Idman and Mercy Moroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now the historic steam locomotive Sir Nigel Gresley has returned to the North Yorkshire Moors Railway after a 7-year overhaul.
It was the first train in the UK to set the official post-war speed record for steam traction of 112 miles per hour in 1959.
Yes, well, our reporter Anna Riley has been speaking to passengers who enjoyed the experience of travelling behind the only operational Class A4 Pacific and those who made it possible.
An engine built for speed. The Sir Nigel Gresley was designed to carry travellers from London to Edinburgh, setting a record along the way. Now, after a major refurb, it's given passengers in Yorkshire a taste of nostalgia, at the same time as preserving a piece of British history.
It's just a whole different era that we need to preserve, because they're much more magnificent than the trains that are running just now. The trains that are running just now have got no character. These things are almost living pieces of equipment. You know, it's absolutely fantastic.
The locomotive is operated by many volunteers at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, who believe icons of the past like this one should be preserved for the future.
I've driven and fired every working A4 locomotive, and Sir Nigel Gresley today is probably the best one I've been in. They've done a fantastic job. But we built everything, we designed everything, we were excellent, and a lot of the skills now are no longer needed. Because they're no longer needed, they're no longer taught, and we run a very real risk of losing the skills that we used to have. It's vital that we remember what we were able to do, and we still do it as good as we used to do.
Sir Nigel Gresley is celebrating its 85th anniversary in November and shows no sign of running out of steam yet. Anna Riley, GB News, Gromont.
No.
I love things that give you a sense of nostalgia.
No, I
a warm
agree.
feeling inside. We were speaking this morning with some of our producers about which shows we remember from childhood.
Yeah.
So it's always nice to kind of have something that takes you back.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, we talk a lot about the future and, how to move society forward and progress, but actually it's the past that gives us a foundation. So something there.
Very profound. Very profound. Something else that's profound, religion, churches. And churches in England are apparently having to install new gas and oil boilers because, get this, environmental ones are too expensive to run. And this is putting their plans for net zero at risk.
On February 2020, the General Synod, the Church of England's legislative body, voted in favour of setting a target for the institution to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. However, going green has ended up being far more expensive than not. In one case, a church in Surrey was told fitting an electric heating system would cost them more than £8,000 compared to £1,800 for a gas boiler.
Yes, well, we are going to try and get... we're going to speak to a priest about all of this, and we can speak to him because he's back. Joining us now is the Archdeacon of London, Father Luke Miller. Thank you for joining us. Many people will be saying, why on earth is the church trying to jump on this net zero bandwagon, especially if it's taking money away rather than saving money?
Well, we're motivated in everything by our faith, first of all. And as Christians, we have a care both for the environment, because we believe it to have been created by God, whom we serve, and we are part of that creation. And also for our neighbour. And there are both the results of global warming internationally and, of course, locally here in London, where I am, we have terrible air pollution, for example. And so there's a whole series of reasons why we would want to be caring for the environment in which we live and which we share with our neighbours, both because of love of our God and love of neighbour. And of course, the other thing is that the economics of this are complex, but there are all sorts of ways in which you save money by attempting to become carbon neutral. My own church, where I'm a rector, we've installed air exchange heat pumps, and we hope by that means to reduce our costs because of the new technologies that we're using.
Just on that point about, saving money and also considering the environment, but does the church have a hierarchy in terms of issues that it cares about? Because some people would argue eradicating poverty and making sure that people actually live a kind of economically secure life, so they're not stressed out over bills and so on, potentially is more important than environmental questions. You have to balance those things. So would you say the church, by essentially signing up to the net zero, prioritises the environmental ones, even though it's actually seemingly costing more money?
Well, of course, what the church attempts to do all the time is to prioritise our service of God and our love of God and our love of neighbour. And that will express itself in all sorts of ways. Our motivation is always to try to follow where God leads. And we read in Scripture that the whole of creation groans in longing for the redemption which is to come, and that's both a social redemption, it's a redemption of economic issues, it's a redemption of the creation itself. More profoundly than any of those things is the eternal redemption that we look for and that we proclaim. And these things are linked together and shouldn't be seen as being separated out. And so, for example, part of the eradication and care of our neighbours who are in great poverty is care for the environment, because we are aware that environmental pollution and environmental change impacts the poorest more than it does the wealthy. And so all of these things are profoundly linked. And profoundly linked as a result of the fact that we are attempting in all things to serve God first and our neighbour in him.
And also, Father, what should the church do now? If it's now facing this challenge and this cost, what should they do?
Well, there are all sorts of possibilities. This is, of course, a cost, but there's also the fact that all heating systems and things at some point need renewing, and so finding a way to do that is greener is better, and actually it's also cheaper. So, for example, in my own case, we've partnered with another church. We and they have all kinds of social and activities, care for the poor, care for elders, care for those who are in need. Those activities all need a warm and safe environment. They are activities, therefore, which we've been able to fundraise for, and our project to reheat the church has brought brilliantly together both our care of the environment, our care for our Grade 1 listed building, our care for our neighbour and the poor and those who are in need. All of those things are things which both our external funding partners and our own resources have been brought together and to fund. And so, in some senses, precisely the point you make, that the economics of this are about bringing that web of various different things together.
Yeah. Father Luke Miller, sorry to cut you off. I hope God will forgive me for that. But Archdeacon of London, Father Luke Miller, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you for coming on our show. Now, shall we? What do you think of that? You don't seem convinced.
Yeah, I just think that the church should focus on its fundamental priority. And even though Father did say that it was doing that, I think too often do I hear the church recently intervening in issues that I think are deeply politically contentious. And it seems a strange coincidence that all of the stances they take seem to be the ones that one might say are the woke stances, whether that's environmental issues, whether that's on the Rwanda plan, whether that's also on questions of gender identity and institutional racism. It always seems one side of the argument. And so I think that they should focus on, serving the congregation when they closed churches during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's quite ridiculous, to be honest, to be spending so much money trying to sort of retrofit green-friendly boilers, when there is much more for the church to be doing, I would say. In local communities, there are enough people who are going hungry, enough people who are homeless. So the idea that they should be shelling out all this money just for a green boiler or whatever, I think it's I don't approve, shall we say. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Let's go to some of yours. I liked this view from Andrew. He says, I think many of us sympathise a lot more with Boris than Liz Truss. Yes, she has a challenging inbox, but at least she knew what was in her inbox. Look at the surprises in Boris's inbox and the constant attempts to derail him throughout his premiership. Really interesting point there, because, of course, a lot of the problems Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, was faced with were unexpected. You know, he wasn't coming in for such a wreck, really.
Well, he made certain decisions in relation to COVID, and I still don't think that we've had an honest conversation as a society about the impact of COVID. And some people have called this the cost of lockdown crisis, not just the cost of living crisis. So I do think Boris Johnson should take some responsibility for the decisions and the consequences of those decisions that we're experiencing today.
Well, John doesn't approve, Liz doesn't care about public opinion or the policies that the public wants. She abandoned the manifesto and just gave tax cuts to her rich friends. Well, tell us what you really think, John. Not somebody who approves of Liz Truss. Thank you for all your views today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. That is it from us, though. But don't go away. Up next is GB News Day with Gloria and Mark.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Bit of a three-way split with the weather today. Much of eastern England staying dry and bright. A mix of sun and showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain elsewhere in between, thanks to this weather front that's just slowly ambling across the UK, bringing cloud and outbreaks of rain, particularly to parts of Wales and northwest England through the rest of today. But clearing away from Scotland and Northern Ireland, so skies starting to brighten here with some sunshine, but there will still be a few showers around. Clouding over the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, but generally here staying dry and bright. We'll see a bit more rain just creeping into parts of the Midlands and southwest England by the end of the afternoon. With a bit of brightness, temperatures getting into the high teens across the southeast corner. Elsewhere, we're looking at generally 14 or 15 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll see a little bit more of that rain over the Midlands, just drifting south across East Anglia and the southeast. Nothing too heavy, but staying fairly misty and murky across southernmost counties of England, with drizzly rain at times. Elsewhere, many places dry. Quite a chilly night, especially for Scotland, the far north of England. Some frost likely in rural spots here, but cracking start to Thursday with plenty of sunshine around. Some fog patches, and particularly in the south, quite grey, misty, murky. And we'll still have some drizzly rain at times across southernmost counties of England. Some rain as well will come into western parts of Scotland, particularly the Highlands, the Western Isles, where it could get quite blustery. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, but actually a good chunk of the country tomorrow, dry and bright, with decent spells of sunshine and temperatures around average for the middle of October. A bit more of that wet and windy weather will push across northern Scotland, and we'll see some rain spreading through the central belt during Thursday evening. At the same time, some patchy rain still across southernmost counties of England, and then more rain coming back into the northwest. It's all a bit messy, really, and stays that way into the outlook. Further spells of rain crossing the country with some sunshine in between.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. You're watching GB News Day with Mark Longhurst and me, Gloria DiPiero.
Well, just moments away now from Prime Minister's questions. Likely to be a rather difficult session for Liz Truss, being faced with growing disquiet on the backbenches and a Bank of England governor who says he won't keep bailing the government out.
Well, this is the scene live in the House of Commons.
It's a great fact.
Now, you can hear Scottish questions going on there. But in about 9 minutes' time, we'll hear from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. And then later, the Prime Minister will be on a charm offensive in the tea rooms, we read, and meeting with the backbench Conservative MPs later.
Well, later too, hearing from Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg, a big supporter, of course, of Liz Truss. But this morning he appeared to blame the Bank of England's interest rate policy for the current financial problems.
This is GB News Day. Joining us now to look ahead to PMQs is Labour Shadow Health Minister Fariel Clark and the Conservative MP Tom Hunt.
Welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Welcome. We don't like to turn our backs on either of you.
So I'll go this way. You go that way.
Tom, so we understand that your leader is going to embark on a charm offensive. The charm offensive is designed to make you feel charmed. What does she need to do?
Well, I think it's good that we have, a Prime Minister who wants to charm her parliamentary party. It's always good to have that level of engagement. Sadly, I won't be there to be charmed. I think I'll be in a taxi on the way back from here, so I'll probably miss the charm offensive. But, I think that she's, we've got a really difficult context at the moment. I admire her determination to cut taxes and to get growth in the economy. We've made some huge interventions throughout the last couple of years on furlough, grants, and with the energy price cap as well.
Did you like the 45p tax?
Asking questions today falls to me. The UK government...
I think there's an economic case for it, but I understand a lot of the concerns my colleagues have, and I think we probably ended up in the right place.
Talking of charm offensive, Jacob Rees-Mogg didn't seem to issue much charm this morning, blaming the Bank of England and the interest rate policy for all these financial difficulties. Many economists basically saying he's lost his senses.
I have to say, I didn't see the Business Secretary's comments, but, let
me just outline what he says. The bank failing to raise rates by only 0.5% rather than 0.75%, as the United States did, is what's caused this difficulty in the markets.
Yeah, I think that Jacob Rees-Mogg knows more about economics than I do. He knows what he's talking about in economics. It's up for the Bank of England to decide interest rates. But, I'm sure if Jacob has made those comments, it's based upon somebody who has a strong grasp of economics.
Right. Does it leave Labour with an open goal to kick the ball in the back of the net when you hear that from the Business Secretary?
It's a disaster. I mean, this is an absolute disaster. For them to be attacking the institutions of this, independent institutions of this country, which they should have been consulting before this disastrous mini-budget, is, you know, it's absolutely laughable. They should, you know, instead of going on charm offensive with her backbenchers, she should be apologising to the thousands of people in this country whose mortgages have gone up by over £500 a month because of the crisis caused by this government.
But Fariel, presumably, as the Labour Party, you want to raise benefits in line with prices. You probably don't want to see any cuts to public spending. You probably want nurses, firefighters, teachers, all those hard-working public sectors workers to get a decent pay rise. So you criticise the Tories for irresponsible borrowing, but I suspect your sums probably don't add up, unless you don't want to do all those things.
Look, the Prime Minister, in her during the leadership contest, promised not to actually cut spending on public services. This is the only reason we are talking about the benefits not going up with the inflation is because of the economic crisis that we're in. That's where we're having to discuss that now. Labour, every promised commitment that Labour has made, we have actually said where the funding is going to come from. So Labour have, you know, we haven't made any commitments that are unfunded, but the Tories should have. This is a crisis that they created.
I think it's extraordinary. It's got the Labour Party dismissing the entire mini-budget. The mini-budget's terrible. But actually, if you break it down, they support the vast majority of the measures. I mean, yesterday...
Well, the
Labour
19
Party,
pence tax rate.
So the NI, you know, reversing the increase in NI, Labour support, basic rate. I think Labour support cutting the basic rate moved a little bit on it.
Said that.
But I think...
Well,
so it's...
Tom, we've been saying then the increase in National Insurance Tax, that was wrong from day one. We've been calling on your government not to put it up. So, yes, we do want you to...
So on the one hand, the Labour Party is saying this mini-budget is just a terrible thing.
It is.